André Villas Boas. That's probably a name that you haven't heard in a long time, unless you're Portuguese, of course. After all, despite being the 5th youngest Premier League manager of all time and being dubbed by many the future special one, his managerial career never really amounted to anything. He had a tremendous debut season with Porto, where he won 4 trophies including the Europa League, but from that moment on, it will all go downhill. Villas Boas was fired in the middle of his first season in charge of Chelsea, and to make matters worse, the club would go on to win the Champions League that same year with an interim manager. Then he managed to splurge all the money from Bale's transfer in a huge group of flops during his time with Tottenham before departing to millionaire leagues. To most fans, he was a joke, while others completely forgot him. But for FC Porto fans, he was their white knight, who was destined to save them from the cancers that were rotting the once unstoppable Portuguese giants. In fact, I'll go even further. In the Western football culture, there was no bigger dictatorship than the regime that commanded FC Porto. No matter how unhappy your board of directors made you feel, I can guarantee that not a single one of them had literal gangsters acting as some type of Praetorian guard. But in a way, that guard of gangsters was the biggest reason why Villas Boas was able to dethrone Pinto da Costa with a whopping 80% of the fans voting for him, thus ending the most successful, but at the same time, most tyrannical reign in football history. Let me explain. Imagine what would be like if your club was nothing more than the regional minnow, with just a few league titles to its name, far away from the dominance of the clubs from the capital city. You were the underdog, the working class man with a heavy accent that hates the system and wishes that in the future someone could come and change it. Until one day, it happened. Pinto da Costa went from fan to sports director and then into president and completely revolutionized FC Porto. When he was elected in 1982, Porto had only won the league 7 times in almost 50 years of the competition's history. Fast forward to 2024, and FC Porto now counts a total of 30 league titles. They're by far the most successful Portuguese club at an international level, with 7 titles compared to Benfica's 2. In total, they're only 2 titles behind Benfica. This is undeniably a massive achievement, and I think all fans, Benfica and Sporting included, should respect what Pinto da Costa achieved during his reign. Even if you take into consideration the corruption scandals that happened like the Golden Whistle, you have to understand that unfortunately, this is part of football. Benfica was also investigated for match fixing from 2016 until 2020, Sporting was also notoriously investigated for corruption in handball matches, and if you look at their neighbors Real and Barca, the corruption is even more apparent. Let's be real, you can't sit here and pretend your club has never done anything wrong unless you support a minnow from the lower leagues. The problem with the Pinto da Costa regime had nothing to do with corruption against others. The issue was that the Dragon's president was getting old, really old, and as time passed, he started allowing more and more corrupt individuals to hold power in the club. His son, agents, and other directors had more interest in favoring themselves and those close to them than the club itself. The first ridiculous example of bad management was when Porto, still a stable club, decided to completely rearrange their squad, buying a bunch of overpriced Spanish nobodies into the club that ended up achieving absolutely nothing. Across 2 seasons, Porto spent over 105 million euros on players, and instead of turning that into a huge profit like they always did, they lost 29.3 million euros. If you support a big club, Man United, this is nothing. But for a team like Porto, this loss puts a huge dent on their future aspirations. And the worst part of it all is that even after the departure of the 2 men you could mostly blame for this, the terrible financial management continued. In fact, in a way, it got even worse. After 5 years without winning a single trophy, Porto would end that trial thanks to former youth player Sérgio Conceição. Porto never played beautifully on the rim. He picked the most average of players from across the league, turned up their physical game and relied a lot on their passion, or raça as we Portuguese like to call it. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And Porto has been able to keep their place as a title contender, which is infinitely better than season after season without a single trophy. But financially, things got even worse. Instead of capitalizing on their success and selling their best players to make a profit like they used to do in the past, Porto began keeping their players until their contracts ran out, and when they didn't, they would sell them in the last year of the contract, effectively lowering the value they would normally receive for the players. These are all the players that left for free in the last 5 years and their market value at the time. And as you can tell, that's a lot of money wasted right there. Besides, there were so many stupid deals in the last couple of years that I doubt you'll find any reasoning behind them. In 2018, Ivan Marcano, then a 31-year-old centre-back, departed to Roma for free. Furthermore, in 4 seasons in the club, he was only decent in the last one. Regardless, Porto still went out of their way to buy him back 1 year later for a further 3 million euros, which was even more than what they originally bought him for. 5 years later, he still remains in FC Porto, but has spent a vast proportion of that time either injured or making amateur mistakes on the pitch. Francisco Conceição, the manager's son and an academy prodigy, was sold to Ajax in 2022 for 5 million euros. Fast forward a year, and the winger had lost value after a terrible debut season in Amsterdam. Nonetheless, Porto bought him back for 10 million euros and even gave Ajax a 20% on a future sale. Obviously, after so many glaring mistakes, someone had to step up. On paper, Villas Boas looked like the perfect option. He loved the club since he was a little boy, he was rich and knew the right people that could help him change the destructive course Porto was headed to. But many fans were afraid of change. They were afraid of letting go of their dear president, the man who stood up for them for decades against the big bad wolves from Lisbon. However, there was one incident that changed everything. In a general assembly scheduled to discuss the club's budget, Ultras leader and notorious hooligan Monkey Man Fernando Madureira ordered the members of Super Dragões to dissuade anyone who was critical of Pinto da Costa by any means necessary. That day will go down as one of the darkest days in FC Porto's history, where old men were beaten down by gangsters for simply voicing their opinion, and those who weren't physically beaten were insulted and threatened. It didn't matter if you were a woman or a man. They even tried to invade André Villas Boas' home, and even though they failed, they brutally attacked his security guard to send a message to the usurper of the throne and to everyone that was against the current regime. If you were against Pinto da Costa, you weren't a true Porto fan. But the thing is, this violent conduct had been going on for years. Super Dragões were notorious for being a violent and criminal ultras association. They had created many conflicts in the past, but since it was against the opponents, most Porto fans turned a blind eye to their violence. And since we're being honest, are we really supposed to believe they did all of that out of loyalty to Pinto da Costa? Not really. Just like everyone around the former president, they were just looking out for themselves. For years, Super Dragões controlled a huge portion of the matchday tickets. Instead of giving back the money to the club, they kept a huge part to themselves in exchange for the loudest support in the league. To make it worse, that money was mostly used in casinos, drugs, and in Monkey Man's case, to build his several businesses and mansions. So obviously, they didn't want Villas Boas to come in and take their ill-gotten gains away. It was a stupid move nonetheless, as after those conflicts, the Portuguese police opened up an investigation and ended up arresting Monkey Man for inciting a riot, and now it's just a matter of time before they charge him for all the other crimes around drug trafficking and criminal organization that he participated in. At the same time, I can't help but feeling sad for Pinto da Costa. Laugh all you want if you hate the man. In a way, I get why your sentiment is valid. Portugal has a toxic football culture, where most Porto fans see Benfica not as a rival, but as an enemy, and vice versa, and most of the blame has to be put on Pinto da Costa's name. It was undeniably time for a change. Porto needs a breath of fresh air, and Portuguese football would benefit much more if the three giants knew how to coexist with each other. Still, at the same time, he's a historical figure that elevated not only Porto, but Portugal as a whole in the eyes of the international fan. At this point, I can't help but see him as a fragile 86-year-old who's no longer able to serve the thing he loves the most in this world. It's sad that he failed to realize that his time was up a long time ago, and that he had to fall victim to that old saying, you either die a hero, or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you on the next one.